After 15 years in the police force, all I wanted was quiet. The constant sirens, the paperwork, the human misery day after day, it wears on you. My wife Jessica and I had saved for years, dreaming of a place where we could raise children without the shadows of crime hanging over us. Ridgewood Estates seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, two-car garages, children playing without fear. The real estate agent drove us through wide, clean roads and showed us a colonial-style house with a decent yard and good bones. I remember telling Jessica as we toured the place, "This could be our fresh start." She squeezed my hand and nodded, already picturing where our furniture would go. The closing was smooth. The moving truck arrived on schedule. That first evening, we sat on camping chairs in our empty living room, eating pizza straight from the box, feeling like we had finally made it. We toasted with plastic cups filled with champagne. "To normal life," Jessica said, clinking her cup against mine. The neighbors appeared welcoming at first. The Johnsons from across the street brought over a homemade casserole. The elderly couple next door, the Patels, offered gardening advice. I spent that first weekend unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and feeling the weight of my old life lifting from my shoulders. I slept better that first week than I had in years. No calls in the middle of the night, no crime scenes, just cicadas chirping and the occasional car driving past. Then I met Corinne Winters. She did not knock on our door like the others. She appeared at the edge of our property while I was checking the mailbox. Her posture was rigid, her smile practiced. Her blonde hair was cut in that distinctive sharp bob that seemed to match her personality. "You must be the new homeowner," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I am Corinne Winters, president of the Ridgewood Homeowners Association." There was something in the way she emphasized president that made me take notice. Before I could properly introduce myself, she handed me a thick black binder. "This is your welcome packet. It contains all the rules and regulations for our community." I thanked her, thinking it would be a pamphlet with trash pickup days and local recommendations. Instead, it was nearly 200 pages of restrictions, regulations, and penalties. "I suggest you read it thoroughly," Corinne added, her voice dropping slightly. "People who follow my lead tend to enjoy their time here, those who do not." She let the sentence hang in the air between us. I nodded politely, maintaining my composure. Years in law enforcement teach you to recognize warning signs in people, and something about Corinne set off mild alarms. But I reminded myself I was not a deputy sheriff here. I was just a homeowner who wanted peace. "Thank you for the information. We are excited to be part of the community," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Corinne smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She scanned our property slowly, like she was taking inventory. "Your front garden could use some attention," she noted before walking away. "The association has standards about curb appeal." I watched her retreat down the sidewalk, that binder heavy in my hands. Jessica came out to join me. "Who was that?" she asked. "The HOA president," I replied. "Something tells me we should read this carefully." Jessica laughed. "How bad could it be? We are not planning to paint the house neon green or anything." It took only 6 days for the first citation to arrive. An official-looking notice was taped to our front door. "Violation, waste receptacles left in street view beyond permitted hours." I checked the HOA rules. We had left our trash bins out 12 hours longer than the mandated retrieval time. The fine was $50. "This is ridiculous," Jessica said, staring at the notice. "We were both at work. The bins were gone by evening." I nodded, but paid the fine anyway. "Let us just follow the rules. I do not want to make waves." That first citation was not about trash bins. It was Corinne marking her territory, and I had just stepped into it. The citations did not stop. 2 weeks later, I found another notice. "Violation, lawn exceeds maximum permitted height of 3.5 inches. I measured my grass. It was barely 4 inches in some spots. The fine was $75. I sighed, wrote another check, and mowed the lawn immediately. The following week, Corinne herself knocked on our door. "Your back fence is 6 inches higher than regulation," she informed me, not bothering with pleasantries. "That will need to be corrected within 7 days." I explained that the fence had been there when we purchased the home. "That is not my concern," Corinne replied. "Previous owners were granted a temporary exception that expired with the sale. The rules are clear." She handed me another citation with a $100 fine attached. Before I could respond, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of our property. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping outside. "Documenting the violation," she said, as if it were obvious. And your holiday wreath is not HOA approved. That will be another citation. It was October, and Jessica had hung a small autumn wreath with orange and yellow leaves. I took a deep breath. Karen, I would appreciate if you would not photograph our home without permission. She looked at me as if I had suggested something outlandish. As HOA president, I have authority to inspect and document any violations on any property within Ridgewood Estates. Section 14, paragraph 9. She continued snapping photos, then walked away, tapping on her phone. That evening, I went through the rules handbook more carefully. The regulations were almost comically specific. Garden gnomes prohibited, bird feeders restricted to backyard use only, holiday decorations limited to 14 days before and 7 days after the actual holiday. American flags were permitted, but could not exceed specific dimensions. The rules even specified acceptable paint colors down to the exact shade codes. I showed Jessica, whose initial amusement had faded into concern. Maybe we should have researched the HOA before buying, she said quietly. I nodded, but reminded her that we loved the neighborhood otherwise. We will figure it out. Let us just play by the rules for now. The next day, I removed the wreath and adjusted everything else I could to meet regulations. But it did not matter. Citations continued appearing, flower pots too colorful, mailbox not to specification, a garden hose visible from the street. Each came with increasingly larger fines. One afternoon, while retrieving yet another citation from our door, I noticed our neighbor, Mr. Patel, watching me from his porch. He beckoned me over with a subtle wave. "I see you have met our HOA president," he said, his voice low despite the fact that we were alone. "She is particularly attentive to new residents." I nodded, holding up the latest citation. "You could say that." Mr. Patel looked around cautiously before speaking again. "My advice, just play along. It gets worse if you resist." His warning chilled me. "Has she always been like this?" I asked. Mr. Patel nodded slowly. 5 years now. Before Karen, the HOA was reasonable. Now," he trailed off, then added, "the Richardsons at the end of the street tried to fight back last year. They refused to pay the fines. Karen had their car towed for a parking violation and put a lien on their house. They moved out 3 months later." I thanked him for the information and walked back home unsettled. That night, I started a detailed log of every interaction with Karen and every citation received. The deputy and me could not help but document everything: dates, times, specific language used. Jessica watched me with growing concern. "This is affecting you," she observed as I meticulously filed away copies of citations. "It is affecting us both," I replied. "Your blood pressure was high at your last checkup." Jessica sighed. "I just want to enjoy our new home without feeling like we are under surveillance." The next morning, while leaving for work, I found Karen taking photos of my vehicle parked in our driveway. "Is there a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Your oil pan is leaking," she stated, pointing to a barely visible dark spot on the concrete. "Environmental hazard, section 22, paragraph 4. I checked under my car. There was indeed a small spot, barely the size of a quarter. "I will get that fixed right away," I assured her. She nodded curtly and walked away. That evening, I discovered she had posted on the community website. "Attention RESID and TS. Be advised that the new occupant at 1453 Oakwood Drive has demonstrated aggressive behavior when approached about violations. Please exercise caution." My jaw tightened as I read her public accusation. Jessica read it over my shoulder and placed a steadying hand on my arm. "She is trying to isolate us," she whispered. "Make sure no one allies with us." I nodded, feeling a familiar tension, the same I used to feel before confronting a suspect. But this was different. This was my home, and Karen had just crossed a line. I continued paying the fines while documenting everything. The citations became more frequent, sometimes 3 in a week. Other neighbors began avoiding us, clearly influenced by Karen's warnings about my aggressive behavior. One afternoon, I politely asked Karen to please stop photographing our backyard from the sidewalk. She responded loudly, ensuring other neighbors could hear. "Do not threaten me. I know my rights." I had not raised my voice or made any threatening gesture, but she stormed off as if fleeing danger. 2 days later, the neighborhood exploded with gossip. Karen had called an emergency HOA meeting to address a serious security concern in our community. Through Mr. Patel, I learned that Karen was claiming I had physically threatened her during our last encounter. "She says you raised your hand at her and blocked her path," he told me, looking troubled. "She says she has filed a police report." My stomach dropped. As a law enforcement officer, even false accusations could be damaging. The morning of the HOA meeting, Karen escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. She went door to door through the neighborhood, showing neighbors what appeared to be an official document. By afternoon, 3 different neighbors had texted Jessica asking if everything was okay. When pressed for details, one finally admitted, "Karen showed us an arrest warrant with your husband's name on it. Something about assault and threatening a public official." My blood ran cold. I had faced dangerous criminals, been in shootouts, and testified in high-stakes trials, but nothing prepared me for this. Having my new neighbors believe I was a criminal, Jessica was distraught. "How can she just lie like this? How is this even legal?" I calmed her down, though I was seething inside. "It is not legal, not even close." I asked her to describe the document our neighbor had seen. "Official-looking," she said. "County letterhead, some kind of seal or stamp." I spent my lunch break calling former colleagues at the county sheriff's office. No warrant had been issued in my name, not even a police report filed. Karen had fabricated everything, but the damage was spreading. Parents were keeping children away from our yard. Dog walkers crossed the street when approaching our house. Karen had effectively turned us into pariahs based on a complete fabrication. That evening, I drove to the home of my former supervisor, Captain Reynolds, and explained the situation. He listened gravely, then pulled out his phone. "Let me show you what a real warrant looks like these days," he said, pulling up a template on his secure work email. "The county seal is in the top right, not centered. The judge's signature block is on the left. We use watermarked paper that has a distinct pattern." He showed me other authentication features. If she forged this, she committed a serious crime. I returned home with a plan forming. Rather than confronting Karen directly, I would let her present her case at the HOA meeting, let her dig her own grave. Jessica was worried. "What if people believe her? What if they vote to fine us or force us out?" I took her hands in mine. "Trust me, I built cases against actual criminals for 15 years. Karen is an amateur playing a dangerous game." The HOA meeting was set for the community center. We arrived early, finding seats in the back. Nearly every homeowner in Ridgewood was present, a testament to Karen's ability to create drama. She stood at the podium like a prosecutor, arranging papers importantly. I noticed several board members looking uncomfortable, already sensing something was off. Karen called the meeting to order with exaggerated formality. "Thank you all for coming to this emergency session," she began. "It is my solemn duty as your president to inform you of a serious threat in our community." She proceeded to describe me as an unstable, aggressive individual who had threatened her physically. "I feared for my safety," she declared, her voice trembling theatrically. "And after researching this individual further, I discovered something disturbing." She held up a document. Even from the back, I could see it was a poorly executed forgery of a county warrant. "This is an active arrest warrant," she announced gravely. "For assaulting a public official, me." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen continued, building her narrative. "I believe we must vote immediately to begin eviction proceedings under Section 30 of our bylaws, removal of homeowners who present a clear danger to the community." She looked around the room, clearly expecting nodded agreement. Some people looked at me with fear and suspicion. Others seemed confused. The board members exchanged glances. When Karen finally finished her presentation, she asked if anyone had questions. I raised my hand. She pointed at me reluctantly, probably hopping to avoid giving me the floor. I stood slowly and walked to the front of the room. "I do have some questions about this warrant," I said calmly. Karen's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. I turned to address the room. "My name is Michael Stevens. My wife Jessica and I moved here 2 months ago seeking peace and community after my 15-year career as a deputy sheriff with the county." The room went deadly silent. Karen's face drained of color. "In my career, I executed hundreds of arrest warrants, processed thousands of legal documents, and testified in court as an expert on legal documentation." I reached into my folder and pulled out papers of my own. "This," I said, holding up a document with official county letterhead, "is what an actual county arrest warrant looks like." I placed it on the projector so everyone could see. "Note the positioning of the seal, the watermark pattern, the specific format of the judge's signature block." I then asked for Karen's document, which she clutched tightly. "May I?" I extended my hand. Reluctantly, feeling the room's eyes on her, she handed it over. I placed her forgery next to the real template. The differences were obvious even to untrained eyes. This document is not only fake, I explained calmly, but creating it constitutes multiple felonies: forgery of official documents, impersonation of judicial authority, and filing false reports. I turned to Karen directly. There is no police report. There is no warrant. There was no assault. I never threatened you, and we both know it. Karen's face contorted with rage and panic. You cannot prove anything, she blurted out. But I was prepared. I pulled out my phone and played a recording. My doorbell camera had captured our last interaction, clearly showing my calm demeanor and her manufactured outrage. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen looked around desperately, but found only accusing eyes. Without another word, she gathered her papers and stormed out, the door slamming behind her with definitive force. In the silence that followed, I simply stated, I have no interest in causing trouble in this community. My wife and I moved here for peace, but I will not stand by while someone fabricates crimes and threatens our well-being. I returned to my seat beside Jessica, who squeezed my hand tightly. The HOA vice president, a man named Robert, approached the podium looking shaken. I think we need to adjourn and reconvene after the board has had time to process this information. As people filed out, several neighbors approached us, offering apologies and support. The walls of Karen's kingdom had begun to crumble. In the days following the meeting, the neighborhood dynamic shifted dramatically. Neighbors who had avoided us now stopped to chat. Some shared their own stories of Karen's tyranny, arbitrary fines, threats, public humiliation for minor infractions. Each story reinforced what I already suspected. Karen had been abusing her power for years, and no one had dared to challenge her until now. The HOA board called an emergency session without Karen present. They invited me to share what I knew about the forged warrant. I brought Captain Reynolds as an expert witness. He confirmed that the document Karen had created was a clumsy forgery that nonetheless contained enough official elements to constitute a serious crime. Creating false legal documents with intent to harm someone's reputation or cause distress is a felony, he explained to the board. If formal charges were filed, she could face substantial penalties. Robert, the vice president, looked particularly disturbed. We had no idea she was going this far, he admitted. We knew Karen could be zealous about the rules, but this crosses every line. Another board member, an older woman named Alina, spoke up. She always presented herself as having legal expertise, said she worked in the county court system for years. I shook my head. I checked with courthouse personnel records. Karen Winters has never been employed by the county in any capacity. This revelation stunned the board. Karen had apparently constructed an entire false identity as a legal expert to bolster her authority. Further investigation revealed she had been using online legal document templates to create official-looking paperwork. Her legal background was completely fabricated, likely to intimidate homeowners who might question her decisions. The board agreed to hold a special meeting where all homeowners could voice their experiences with Karen's leadership. The community center was packed that evening. One by one, residents came forward with stories that painted a disturbing picture of life under Karen's rule. The Gandhis had been fined repeatedly for cooking smells that Karen deemed offensive to the community standard. The Wilsons' college-age son had been reported to police for suspicious behavior, which turned out to be studying late in their garage that he had converted to a quiet space. Most disturbing was the testimony of Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly widow who broke down in tears describing how Karen had threatened to place a lien on her home over unapproved rose bushes planted in memory of her late husband. She told me ignorance of the rules was no excuse, Mrs. Rodriguez explained, her voice shaking. She made me dig them up myself while she watched. I sat quietly, compiling notes and building what was essentially a case file against Karen. Jessica, who worked as a paralegal, helped organize the testimony and evidence. Together, we created a comprehensive document detailing years of abuse of power, harassment, and fraudulent activity. When everyone had spoken, Robert asked me if I wanted to add anything. I approached the podium one final time. What we have heard tonight goes beyond strict rule enforcement, I began. This is a pattern of deliberate intimidation, targeted harassment, and in some cases, criminal behavior. I laid out the evidence methodically. the fake warrant, the false credentials, the selective enforcement of rules against people Karen disliked. As someone who has spent my career upholding the law, I cannot in good conscience allow this to continue. I proposed 3 immediate actions: remove Karen from the HOA board, audit all outstanding fines to determine which were legitimate, and create a committee to review and simplify the overly complex regulations. The room erupted in applause. The motion to remove Karen passed with only 2 abstentions. As the meeting concluded, neighbors approached to thank me, some with tears in their eyes. "You stood up when no one else would," Mr. Patel told me, gripping my hand firmly. Karen's response came the next morning, a flurry of new citations against every household that had spoken against her at the meeting. She seemed to believe she could intimidate people back into submission, but something fundamental had changed. Neighbors began posting photos of their citations in the community chat with laughing emojis. Others simply tossed them in the trash. Her power was broken, and she knew it. I received the most citations of all, 15 violations in a single day, each more ridiculous than the last. Driveway insufficiently pressure washed. Doorbell camera invades HOA airspace. Garage door opened more than necessary time for vehicle entry. Jessica and I posted them on our refrigerator as a bizarre trophy collection. When Karen saw us through the window, calmly reading her notices while drinking coffee, something in her seemed to snap. She pounded on our door, demanding we take her citations seriously. I opened the door but remained in the threshold, preventing her from entering. "Karen, the board has suspended your authority pending review. These citations are not valid." She grew more agitated, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she hissed. "I built this community. I decide who belongs here." I maintained my calm. "The law decides that, Karen, not you, never you." Something in my steady gaze must have finally reached her. She backed away, her expression a mixture of rage and fear, before hurrying down our walkway. That weekend, the board unanimously voted to permanently remove Karen as HOA president. Robert was elected as interim president until formal elections could be held. The first act of the new board was to dismiss all pending citations issued under Karen's leadership unless they could be independently verified as legitimate violations. Over 90% were thrown out. Karen refused to accept the decision. She began sending threatening emails to board members, claiming she would sue for wrongful removal. But her threats rang hollow now. The community had seen behind her mask, and there was no going back. The queen had been dethroned, and her kingdom was discovering what freedom felt like. With Karen removed from power, the atmosphere in Ridgewood Estates transformed almost overnight. Neighbors who had barely spoken in years began chatting across driveways. Children played more freely in front yards. Small personal touches started appearing on houses. Wind chimes, decorative planters, bird feeders, all previously forbidden under Karen's strict interpretation of the rules. But the legacy of fear she had created did not disappear immediately. Some homeowners, particularly those who had lived under her regime the longest, remained cautious. "What if she comes back?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked me one afternoon as I helped her replant her memorial rose bushes. "The rules are still there. She just enforced what was written." She was right. Karen might be gone, but the infrastructure she had built remained intact. I began attending every board meeting, offering my perspective on how to reform the HOA. "The problem is not just Karen," I explained during one session. "It is the system that allowed someone like her to gain so much power." I proposed a complete overhaul of the regulations, simplifying the language, removing arbitrary restrictions, and adding checks and balances to prevent future abuse. Jessica, with her paralegal background, volunteered to help draft the new regulations. "The current rules are deliberately complicated," she pointed out. "They use legal jargon to intimidate homeowners into compliance without understanding." She worked with a leaner from the board to create a clear, concise document that preserved necessary standards while eliminating Karen's excesses. Meanwhile, more homeowners came forward with documentation of Karen's abuses. The Johnsons had saved emails showing Karen had threatened to report them to Child Protective Services because their children played too loudly in their own backyard. The Wilsons produced bank statements showing they had paid over $4,000 in questionable fines over 3 years. The Patels revealed that Karen had blocked approval of their backyard patio project unless they used a contractor who turned out to be her brother-in-law. The evidence painted a picture not just of petty tyranny, but of potential financial impropriety. Robert and the board authorized a full audit of HOA finances during Karen's tenure. The results were troubling: selective enforcement of fines, missing documentation for expenditures, and contracts consistently awarded to the same small group of vendors, all with personal connections to Karen. "We need to consider legal action," Robert said gravely after reviewing the audit results. "This goes beyond HOA politics. There could be actual fraud involved." The board voted to consult with an attorney specializing in HOA law. Their conclusion was sobering. Karen's actions potentially constituted civil and criminal violations. I drafted a formal petition calling for 3 actions: Karen's permanent ban from HOA leadership, restitution for improperly collected fines, and a complete revision of the HOA Constitution. We went door to door collecting signatures. The response was overwhelming. Nearly 80% of homeowners signed, many adding personal notes about their experiences under Karen's leadership. Karen, meanwhile, did not go quietly. She began a counter-campaign, visiting sympathetic neighbors and portraying herself as a victim of a personal vendetta. She claimed the neighborhood would fall into disrepair without her vigilance. A few longtime residents sided with her, posting signs proclaiming, "Karen kept our property values high and standards matter." But her supporters were clearly a minority. When she attempted to call her own unofficial HOA meeting at her home, only 7 people attended. The community had moved on. The board formally accepted our petition and began implementation of the proposed changes. A committee was formed to rewrite the HOA Constitution, with an emphasis on transparency, fairness, and limited powers. Karen made one final attempt to reassert control. She distributed flyers claiming that property values were already declining due to lax enforcement, and included photos of supposed violations: children's bicycles left on lawns, garbage bins visible from the street, unapproved flower varieties in gardens. The community's response was unexpected. Neighbors began deliberately placing items Karen had flagged in their yards as a form of peaceful protest. Colorful bicycles appeared on front lawns. Garden gnomes multiplied overnight. American flags of all sizes flew proudly. It was a visual rejection of everything Karen stood for: oppressive uniformity, control, fear. When she drove through the neighborhood and saw what was happening, something in her seemed to finally break. She stopped sending citations. Her supporters went quiet. The resistance had apparently ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. At the next board meeting, Robert announced the results of the HOA audit. Over $20,000 in questionable fines had been collected during Karen's presidency. The board voted unanimously to refund these amounts to the affected homeowners. They also approved the initial draft of the revised HOA Constitution, which reduced the president's powers and required transparency in all enforcement actions. As we left the meeting, Jessica squeezed my hand. "You know, when we moved here, I never expected you would end up reforming local government." I laughed. "Neither did I, but some habits die hard, I guess." We walked home through streets that felt fundamentally different, not just because of the garden gnomes and wind chimes, but because of the atmosphere. People waved as we passed. Children played freely. The shadow of fear had lifted. Karen had built her power on isolation and intimidation, but in trying to target us, she had inadvertently united her victims. Together, we had not just removed a tyrant, we had dismantled the system that enabled her. Ridgewood Estates was healing, one garden gnome at a time. While the neighborhood began its recovery, I faced a difficult decision. The evidence against Karen went beyond HOA violations. The forged warrant alone constituted multiple felonies: impersonating judicial authority, creating fraudulent legal documents, using those documents to harass and intimidate. These were serious crimes. As a law enforcement officer, even a former one, I had an ethical obligation to report what I knew. After discussing it with Jessica, I compiled a comprehensive file documenting Karen's actions. I included the forged warrant, witness statements, financial records from the HOA audit, and my own detailed notes. I brought everything to my former colleague, Detective Martinez, at the county sheriff's office. She reviewed the materials carefully, her expression growing increasingly serious. "This is textbook criminal harassment, forgery, and fraud," she concluded. "The warrant forgery alone is a Class D felony. The financial mismanagement could constitute embezzlement depending on where the money went." She looked up at me. "You understand that filing this report will likely result in criminal charges. There is no going back once the wheels are in motion." I nodded. "I understand. But the law exists for a reason. Karen systematically terrorized an entire community for years. She used fake legal authority to threaten and control people. If she faces no consequences, what message does that send?" Detective Martinez nodded and began the process of opening an official investigation. 3 weeks later, Karen was arrested at her home. The charges included multiple counts of forgery, criminal harassment, impersonation of a legal authority, and financial fraud related to HOA funds. The local news picked up the story immediately. "HOA president arrested on forgery and fraud charges" made the front page of the county paper. Reporters contacted several Ridgewood residents for comments, and suddenly our quiet neighborhood drama became regional news. Karen was released on bail pending trial. She returned to her home but kept an extremely low profile. Blinds remained drawn. Her car left only for essential errands. The community watched silently, processing the reality that their former leader now faced serious criminal charges. Some expressed sympathy for her public humiliation. Others felt vindication after years of suffering under her rule. Most simply wanted the entire episode to end so healing could truly begin. The district attorney assigned to the case, a no-nonsense woman named Valerie Ortiz, contacted me as the primary complainant. "The evidence is substantial," she explained during our meeting. "Particularly the financial documentation and the forged warrant. Those are straightforward crimes with clear evidence." She paused before continuing. "However, these cases can be complicated. HOA disputes often get dismissed as neighborhood drama even when they cross into criminal territory." I understood her concern. "What can I do to strengthen the case?" I asked. DA Ortiz was direct. "We need impact statements, real examples of how her actions harmed people. Financial loss, emotional distress, medical issues related to stress, anything that shows this was not just petty rule enforcement but caused actual harm." I nodded, knowing exactly who to ask. Over the next week, I helped neighbors prepare their statements. Mrs. Rodriguez described how Karen's harassment about her memorial garden had triggered panic attacks. The Gandhis documented how their children had been afraid to play outside for fear of generating violations. The Wilsons calculated that Karen's excessive fines had forced them to delay necessary medical procedures. Each statement painted part of a larger picture, a community held hostage by fear and arbitrary punishment. Karen's attorney attempted to have the charges reduced, arguing that HOA disputes should remain civil matters. The court disagreed, particularly regarding the forged warrant. "Creating false legal documents with the intent to threaten, intimidate, or defame is clearly criminal conduct," the judge stated during the preliminary hearing. The case would proceed to trial. The courthouse was packed on the first day of proceedings. Many Ridgewood residents attended, some meeting each other for the first time despite having lived as neighbors for years, another legacy of Karen's divided kingdom. Karen entered wearing a conservative suit, her expression carefully neutral. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. The prosecution presented a methodical case. They showed the forged warrant alongside legitimate documents, highlighting the deliberate attempt to mimic official formatting. They presented financial records showing selective enforcement and questionable expenditures. Most damning were the emails Karen had sent threatening various homeowners with legal action she had no authority to pursue. When my turn came to testify, I spoke clearly and factually about discovering the forged warrant, verifying its fraudulent nature, and documenting the pattern of harassment. Karen's attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, a new homeowner with a grudge against established authority. "Is it not true that you began gathering evidence against my client almost immediately after moving in?" he asked. I responded calmly. "I began documenting unusual behavior and excessive enforcement, yes. That is what my law enforcement training taught me to do when something seems wrong." One by one, neighbors testified about their experiences. Mrs. Rodriguez broke down describing how Karen had watched her dig up her late husband's memorial roses. Mr. Wilson recounted how Karen had called the police on his son for studying in his own garage, reporting him as a suspicious person. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern of abuse. Karen took the stand in her own defense, portraying herself as a dedicated volunteer trying to maintain community standards against ungrateful homeowners. "Everything I did was in service to Ridgewood Estates," she insisted. "The rules exist for a reason. Property values depend on consistent enforcement." When questioned about the forged warrant, she claimed it was a visual aid, not meant to be taken as an actual legal document, despite having presented it as authentic. The jury deliberated for just over 4 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on 11 counts, including forgery, fraud, and criminal harassment. Karen showed no emotion as the verdict was read, her face a mask of composure. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and allowed Karen to remain free on bail until then. The sentencing hearing was more subdued. Karen's attorney argued for leniency, citing her previously clean record and community service. Several character witnesses, mostly family members and a few loyal neighbors, spoke about her dedication to neighborhood standards. When given the opportunity to speak, Karen offered a carefully worded statement that acknowledged misunderstandings but stopped short of a true apology. The judge was unmoved. "The court recognizes that homeowners associations serve an important function in maintaining community standards," she stated. "However, that authority does not extend to harassment, intimidation, forgery of legal documents, or financial mismanagement. Your actions reveal a disturbing pattern of using rules as weapons rather than tools for community benefit." Karen was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution of misappropriated funds, and a permanent ban from serving in any HOA leadership position in the county. She was also ordered to complete an anger management program and ethical leadership course. It was not prison time, but it was accountability, something Karen had never faced before. As she left the courtroom, she avoided eye contact with the neighbors who had testified against her. The Queen's reign was officially over, and this time there was no going back. The news of Karen's conviction spread through Ridgewood Estates like wildfire. There was no celebration, no gloating, just a collective exhalation as if the neighborhood could finally breathe freely. DA Ortiz contacted me after the sentencing. "This case sets an important precedent," she explained. "HOA abuse has been normalized for too long. Your community stood up and showed that there are limits to what people must tolerate, even from legitimate authorities." I thought about her words on the drive home. In my years in law enforcement, I had dealt with criminals of all types, violent offenders, con artists, thieves. But Karen represented something different, the everyday tyrant who hides behind rules and respectability while inflicting constant, grinding cruelty. In some ways, this victory felt more significant than any arrest I had made on the force. When I pulled into our driveway, Jessica was waiting on the porch. "It is done," I said simply as I climbed the steps. She nodded and wrapped her arms around me. "Now we can finally just be normal neighbors in a normal neighborhood." I held her tightly, realizing how much the stress of the past months had affected us both. "Yes," I agreed. "Just a boring, ordinary life, exactly what we wanted." As we stood there embracing, I noticed Mr. Patel waving from across the street. Other neighbors were emerging from their homes, gathering in small groups, talking openly without glancing nervously over their shoulders. Something had shifted permanently. Justice matters, even the small, local kind, especially that kind. Spring arrived in Ridgewood Estates with remarkable energy. Front yards bloomed with flowers that would have been deemed non-regulation months earlier. Children's bicycles and toys dotted lawns. Basketball hoops appeared in driveways. The newly elected HOA board, with Robert as president and Alina as vice president, implemented the revised constitution with transparency and common sense as guiding principles. The new rules fit on 3 pages instead of 200. They focused on legitimate community concerns, safety, basic maintenance, and genuine eyesores, while eliminating the micromanagement that had characterized Karen's regime. Monthly meetings were now open forums where neighbors could raise concerns directly. Decisions required majority votes rather than presidential edicts. Most importantly, enforcement followed a reasonable process with appeals available for every decision. Jessica and I found ourselves unexpectedly at the center of community life. Our role in ending Karen's reign had given us a certain status, despite our efforts to downplay it. Neighbors stopped by regularly with questions, concerns, or just to chat. The isolation we had initially experienced was replaced by warm inclusion that sometimes bordered on celebrity treatment. "We should use this goodwill productively," Jessica suggested one evening as we sat on our front porch. "The neighborhood could use more than just freedom from Karen. It could use actual community." I agreed, and together we began organizing events that would have been impossible under the old regime: block parties, holiday celebrations, a community garden on unused HOA land. Our first event was simple: a neighborhood barbecue in the community center parking lot. We expected perhaps 20 or 30 people to attend. Instead, nearly every household showed up, bringing dishes, drinks, and lawn chairs. Children played games while adults who had lived as strangers for years finally introduced themselves properly. The atmosphere was relaxed and joyful, something Ridgewood had not experienced in a very long time. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her famous empanadas. The Gandhis shared homemade samosas. The Wilsons set up a sound system for music. People mingled freely, no longer separated by invisible boundaries of fear and suspicion. I found myself in conversation with people I had only known as nodding acquaintances, learning their stories, their careers, their dreams for the community. Robert took a moment during the gathering to make a brief speech, thanking everyone who had helped transform the neighborhood. When he mentioned my name, there was spontaneous applause that made me uncomfortable but touched me deeply. "I just did what anyone would do," I insisted when he urged me to say a few words. "The real heroes are all of you who found the courage to speak up after years of intimidation." As the event wound down, Mr. Patel approached me with an unexpected question. "Have you seen Karen recently?" he asked. I shook my head. After her sentencing, Karen had become virtually invisible. Her house remained occupied, lights on at night, mail collected daily, but she herself was rarely seen. "I heard she is selling the house," another neighbor added, "moving to Arizona to be near her sister." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor pity. Karen had made her choices and faced the consequences. The community was moving forward without her. That summer brought more positive changes. The community garden flourished under Mrs. Rodriguez's expert guidance. The Patels finally got approval for their backyard patio. The Wilsons' college-aged son organized a neighborhood watch program, a legitimate one based on cooperation rather than surveillance. Each small improvement reinforced the larger transformation from fearful subjects to engaged neighbors. Jessica and I had our own significant news to share. One warm evening, we gathered close friends on our back patio: the Patels, the Rodriguezes, Robert and his wife, and a few others who had become dear to us during the HOA battle. Jessica squeezed my hand as I made the announcement: "We are expecting a baby in January." The reaction was immediate: hugs, congratulations, offers of help, and hand-me-downs. Mrs. Rodriguez declared herself the baby's honorary grandmother on the spot. Later that night, as Jessica and I prepared for bed, she placed my hand on her still flat stomach. "Can you believe how differently things turned out than we expected?" she asked softly. "When we moved here, all we wanted was to be left alone. Now we cannot walk to the mailbox without stopping to chat with 3 different neighbors." I laughed, remembering our initial desire for quiet anonymity. "I guess sometimes you have to fight for peace before you can enjoy it." As autumn arrived, there was one final footnote to the Karen chapter. A moving truck appeared outside her house on a Tuesday morning. I was checking the mail when Karen emerged from her front door carrying a box. Our eyes met briefly across the street. For a moment, I thought she might speak, offer an explanation, an apology, or a final defiant statement. Instead, she simply nodded almost imperceptibly before continuing to the truck. By evening, the house was empty, a sold sign planted firmly in the front yard. The new family moved in 2 weeks later, a young couple with twin toddlers. Jessica and I brought over a homemade lasagna and a simplified copy of the new HOA rules. "Welcome to Ridgewood," I said as they invited us in. "It is a great place to raise children." The mother smiled, bouncing one of the twins on her hip. "We heard. That is why we chose it. Everyone says this is the friendliest neighborhood in the county. Walking home hand in hand with Jessica, I reflected on how easily things could have gone differently. If we had simply paid Corinne's fines and kept our heads down like so many before us, the cycle would have continued indefinitely. One person with enough courage to stand up can change an entire community. Sometimes justice requires someone willing to take a risk, to face conflict rather than avoid it. That night, I stood at our bedroom window looking out at the peaceful street. Porch lights glowed warmly. A teenager walked a dog past our house, waving when they noticed me watching. In the distance, I could hear children laughing as they squeezed in a final game before bedtime. This was what we had fought for, not just freedom from tyranny, but the positive community that could flourish in its absence. Jessica joined me at the window, her growing belly now visible under her nightgown. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, resting her head on my shoulder. I put my arm around her, pulling her close. "I am thinking that some battles are worth fighting, even when you move somewhere looking for peace." She nodded against my shoulder. "And I am thinking our child is going to grow up in a very special neighborhood." As we turned away from the window, I caught sight of the HOA rule binder Corinne had given me on that first day, now a relic sitting on our bookshelf. We had kept it as a reminder of what can happen when rules become weapons and power goes unchecked. But it was also a reminder that systems can be changed, tyrants can be defeated, and communities can heal. Sometimes peace is not something you find. Sometimes it is something you have to create.